Frederick Douglass, writer, speaker, and opponent of slavery. Written by Suzanne Slade. Illustrated by Robert McGuire. Frederick Douglass, writer, speaker, and opponent of slavery. Written by Suzanne Slade. Illustrated by Robert McGuire. Frederick Douglass believed all people should be free. He spent his life working to end slavery and to gain equal rights for everyone. Frederick traveled around the United States and overseas. Along the way, he gave speeches to large crowds. He also wrote books and articles, and he published 3 different newspapers. This is the story of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was a slave from birth. He was born in Tuckahoe, Maryland in 1818. Frederick was raised by his grandmother, Betsy Bailey. His mother was not allowed to care for him. She was forced to live as a slave. She had to work on a farm miles away from where her son lived. When Frederick turned 7, he had to begin working for his owner. He was taken from his grandmother and sent to his owner's plantation. There, he would find no one to care for him. Frederick had to cook, clean, and do odd jobs around the house. For his meals, he got only cooked corn called mush. At night, he slept on a dirt floor. When Frederick was 8 years old, he was given to a family in Baltimore, Maryland. Frederick liked these new people. The Aloud family gave him bread to eat and a bed to sleep in. They also gave him better clothes. Mrs. Aloud began to teach Frederick to read, but when Mr. Aloud found out, he stopped her. Many slave owners did not want slaves to learn. Some states even outlawed teaching African Americans to read and write. Frederick was bright and wanted to keep learning. He asked boys in the neighborhood to show him how to write. He found books and taught himself to read. He even read old newspapers. In his reading, Frederick learned that many people didn't like slavery. When Frederick was 15, he was sent away from the Aloud family. He then worked for several owners. Frederick was often beaten and given little food. He worked long days in the hot sun. His life was full of suffering. Finally, he planned to escape. He got help from friends who were against slavery. Anna Murray, whom he had met in Baltimore, sewed him a sailor suit. He wore the suit so people would not suspect he was a slave. Frederick escaped by boat and train to New York City in 1838. He married Anna soon after arriving there. Many African Americans lived in the North. The northern states had banned slavery. Still, Frederick did not feel safe. There were slave catchers in New York. These people wanted to find runaway slaves and return them to the South. Frederick and his wife moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Frederick changed his last name from Bailey to Douglass to make it more difficult for the slave catchers to find him. In Massachusetts, Frederick began going to abolitionist meetings. Abolitionists were people who wanted to end slavery. At one meeting, someone asked Frederick what it was like to be a slave. He explained how it felt to be tired, hungry, and beaten. His speech was very powerful. Soon, Frederick was asked to speak at many meetings, and he became famous. In 1845, Frederick wrote a book about his life. Thousands of people read it. They were surprised a black man could write so well. The book caused many people to decide slavery was wrong. The book angered people who supported slavery. Some of these people threw eggs and vegetables at Frederick when he gave speeches. But he would not stop his work. In 1847, he started a newspaper to oppose slavery. The paper was called the North Star. The North and South went to war in 1861. This battle became known as the Civil War. Two of Frederick and Anna's sons were soldiers for the North. In 1865, the war ended after 4 years of bloody fighting. Soon, the U.S. Congress acted to free all slaves. Later, Frederick moved to Washington, D.C. He had been named U.S. Marshal for the capital city. No black person had ever held such a high post in the U.S. government. Frederick kept on working for peace and equality until he died in 1895.